from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, a $69 billion deal. Microsoft agrees to buy Activision Blizzard in an all-cash transaction to hatch the world's third biggest gaming company. New details on how it all came together, plus the antitrust hurdles Satya Nadella's company may have to jump. Plus, President Biden thanks Verizon and AT&T for agreeing to delay 5G around key airports. What are the real risks, and when will the new service take flight? And airball, the NBA once again finds itself in a controversy linked to China. This time it involves serial dealmaker Chamath Palihapitiya, a part owner of the Golden State Warriors. We've got all the details. All that in a moment, but first let's get a look at the market. Stocks falling across the board. The tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 sinking more than 2.5%, dragged down by mega caps like Apple and Meta. Our Ed Ludlow has the latest. Ed, walk us through the day.
Yeah, you think you're coming back from a long weekend, a nice relaxed start to the week. No. Financial markets picking up where we left off. Same story and rising yields, the outlook for interest rates. We will see rate hikes sooner and faster, and that's really impacted tech stocks with stretched multiples. You see that in the NASDAQ 100, down 2.6% at its lowest level since October. Really outsized selling in semiconductors, interestingly. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, you see there, down 4.44%. You have to remember throughout the course of 2021, it was an outperformer. And as I said, you see yields rise, 9 basis point gain in the 10-year yield. On Tuesday to 1.87%. I want to look at Bitcoin specifically as well. We're at $42,389 per token. But let's talk about the last 5 days, because it has been a long weekend and we've been trickling lower. We kind of peaked over the weekend, Saturday night, around $44,000. You can see just above my hand. And then we've trickled down. And there's a lot of discussion in the market from analysts, from some of the options market, that $40,000 per token could be the bottom. So even though we've been trickling lower, you remember that selling over around 7 to 10 days ago? Well, that might be the bottom, and things could go up from here. You see a little bounce back as we went into Wednesday's session. I do want to take a really quick look at semiconductors a little bit more closely, because it was a pretty interesting drop. There's not much way in the way of news flow, but this is what I was talking about. Throughout 2021, with that chip crunch, the shortage of semiconductors, the SOX has been an outperformer. There's been so much gain and buying that this might be some pullback. And let's finish on the story of the day. We can't get away from it. Microsoft and Activision. The stock reaction speaks for itself. Microsoft paying a big premium to Activision's Friday closing price before the long weekend, and even its trading price throughout the day on Tuesday. $69 billion deal, as you say, and this is a big deal. I mean, think about the transactions we had in 2021. From memory, Discovery was pretty much up there, right, as the biggest. Well, this is even bigger, and there's so much to discuss.
All right, Ed, you got it. Let's get more on this blockbuster gaming deal. Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard in an all-cash deal valued at almost $69 billion. Activision is known for titles like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, and most of its games are already published on Microsoft's Xbox consoles. Bloomberg's Leanna Baker joins us with all the details. So hearing that, it sounds like it makes more sense. But Leanna, this is a massive deal. How did this all come together?
So it's Microsoft's largest deal to date, and certainly it hadn't really leaked out at all. So it seems like it came together at some point after Thanksgiving. You might remember that the Wall Street Journal published pretty bruising allegations against Activision CEO Bobby Kotick for overseeing a company that didn't have the best workplace culture. There was a lot of harassment claims in there. So at some point after that story came out, these talks must have started, is what we understand. But it hadn't been going on very long. And you might remember last week, Zynga got acquired by Take-Two. So gaming deals are really starting the year at a historical high here. There's never been so much deal making than we've seen this year so far.
What will the antitrust scrutiny be here? I mean, any deal of this size is going to have to go through hoops. Will Microsoft run into some hurdles?
The question is, what regulatory body won't it go through? There are so many jurisdictions around the world. We think the deal might need approval in China, where Microsoft has a footprint. We know the EU always shows keen interest in U.S. tech deals. And then, of course, there's the DOJ and the U.S. FTC. We're trying to figure out which of those bodies will, have oversight over this one. But certainly it's going to come under a lot of scrutiny. I would expect this takes over a year to be approved. The companies have said we won't see this approved until 2023 at the earliest. So we'll be talking about this one, Emily, for quite a long time, given how much is at stake here.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the sort of controversy surrounding Activision Blizzard. There have been calls for CEO Bobby Kotick to step down. He is staying in that job, at least according to the terms of the deal we see now. Talk to us about why Microsoft is taking this risk. I mean, Satya talked about making gaming a more inclusive industry. I mean, I just wonder whether that factored into this deal as a potential risk.
Definitely. And to me, it seems like this is an elegant exit, actually, for Bobby Kotick and his C-suite. The deal will take a while to be approved, and he'll be at the helm until that point. After the deal closes, it's unclear what his future holds. I think the Wall Street Journal reported that he would exit at that point. We're still looking into this, but I think the wording was really careful in that statement for Microsoft. So it doesn't say, Kotick is signed on for the next 5 years. So I wouldn't be surprised if under Phil Spencer, the Xbox chief, there are going to be some changes at Activision. Remember that Microsoft itself does not have the best culture in video games either. I think there have been issues before there. It's pretty widespread in video games, it seems. So I don't think Activision's the only company that needs to reform its ways.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that. And I can't help but go back to Satya's statement in announcing this deal and using that word again, inclusive. But of course, it also ties into Microsoft's ambitions in the metaverse. And Nadella did join us last year exclusively to talk about how Microsoft is making this big bet on the metaverse in an enterprise world. Take a quick listen to what he had to say.
Whenever I think about the metaverse, it sort of comes down to really bringing the real world people, places, and things to the digital world. And this pandemic, if anything, have made, I would say, the commercial use cases much more mainstream, even though sometimes the consumer stuff feels like science fiction.
Leanna, what's the role of the metaverse here? I mean, for so many, it seems like it's still just a buzzword or marketing, but certainly this, efforts, Microsoft getting, a big foot deeper into this digital world.
So virtual worlds might seem new, but video gamers have been living in these virtual worlds for years. Activision owns World of Warcraft, and Microsoft also has Halo. So a lot of these users are living virtually already, although it is still a buzzword, the metaverse. But we've reported that both companies are going to use the argument that the metaverse is an emerging technology and that this deal will better position Microsoft and Activision to succeed in that world where there's going to be a lot of big players, whether it's Meta or Alphabet, trying to have a footprint there. So even if the metaverse is still emerging, it's part of the antitrust argument we understand that Microsoft will be making in Washington with regulators.
All right. Well, we're certainly going to follow all of those ways. Bloomberg's Leanna Baker from our deals team. Thanks so much for giving us the extra color there. I also want to bring in Bloomberg's Tom Giles, our executive editor for Bloomberg Technology. Tom, huge deals like this are hard to do in secret, and Microsoft has somehow done it again. I'm having flashbacks to my LinkedIn days where no one saw it coming. Tell us more about what we know happened behind the scenes here.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a plane the morning that the LinkedIn deal got announced, so it took me very much by surprise. This one also was not one that any of us really had any heads up on, but clearly what happened here was Microsoft took note of the scandals and the controversy that were roiling Activision. You saw that share price come down. And all of the questions that were being raised about Kotick's leadership, about the direction of the company, about the culture, clearly resonated in Redmond. So as these stories were coming out, as the management was embroiled in all of this, That's when Satya Nadella asked some of his deputies, including Spencer, to reach out to the folks at Activision to find out, hey, maybe right now is the time to start thinking about something along these lines. We are told that Bobby Kotick initially was resistant to the deal, but that he himself sent out feelers to see whether, if Microsoft came in, any of the other big players might be willing to follow suit, maybe strike up something of a bidding war. So those are some of the questions and some of the kind of behind the scenes color that we've picked up on. Now, of course, when we talked to Kotick earlier today, he denied that this deal had anything to do with the controversy. But if you're Microsoft, even though you're awash in billions of dollars in cash, which they're clearly spending on this deal, you had to take note when Activision's share price came down so substantially in the aftermath of these allegations and the investigations.
Well, Microsoft has certainly been no stranger to big deals. Just in the last year, Nuance and Bethesda also in the gaming space. I wonder what your take is on the, sort of pushing the envelope there, especially amidst all of this regulatory scrutiny facing big tech.
Well, they got Nuance through most of the regulatory hurdles that it needs to clear, but this is just in a completely different league. I know you were talking to Liana about this, and we've been talking about it on Bloomberg TV throughout the day. But this is a much bigger deal. And so far, Microsoft has been able to really steer clear of the most recent round of antitrust scrutiny that has befallen Amazon, Apple, the company formerly known as Facebook, Alphabet, all of them facing regulatory headaches throughout the country and around the world. The sense that we're getting is that regulators will take a very, very close look at this. And this sense that Microsoft has been dodging the bullets faced by the other big tech platforms may no longer be the case.
How do you think this, signal of future consolidation will ripple through the gaming community, which already has been consolidating, but is really a collection of studios around the world?
Yeah, well, clearly the market felt that this was a buy signal for some of the competitors. The sense is we talk about the metaverse again. You were talking to Leon about it. The sense is that these platforms may want to take really sort of stake a claim out there. Facebook has been talking about this for many, many months with their Oculus platform and some of the other changes that they've announced. They really want to establish themselves in a pole position here. This is Microsoft saying we are not going to be left behind in whatever version of the metaverse materializes. We're not going to be left behind. We're going to give Meta a run for its money. But the strong speculation out there is that Amazon, which also has a gaming business that's had its ups and downs in recent years, may have to follow suit. What does Apple do? What does Alphabet do? And certainly all of these companies have big, big arsenals. What they don't have is a clear path to regulatory scrutiny in an era when the FTC and the DOJ just today announcing new rules and tighter scrutiny of these kinds of deals. And don't forget, you have lawmakers talking a big game of breaking up big tech.
All right. Big game indeed. And Microsoft playing in the big leagues. Thank you, our Tom Giles, for that update. Meantime, this Microsoft announcement comes on the very same day U.S. antitrust enforcers announced an effort to toughen merger reviews. The DOJ and FTC saying a new framework is needed to combat a surge in deals that threatens to worsen already high concentration across industries. This move furthers President Biden's initiative to tackle the spread of dominant companies across the economy and boost competition through antitrust enforcement and government regulation. Coming up, How do we combat future COVID waves? CEO Jason Kelly from the biotech firm Ginkgo Bioworks will join us next to talk about their plan for a large-scale biosecurity infrastructure to fight new surges of the virus and more. This is Bloomberg. Omicron won't be the last variant, and comprehensive strategies are still needed to reduce severe disease, deaths, transmission. That is according to the World Health Organization. This is exactly the mission of my next guest, Ginkgo Bioworks, a biotech company that wants to create a large-scale biosecurity infrastructure to catch ongoing infectious disease threats. CEO Jason Kelly with me here now. Jason, great to have you back on the show. So what are the strategies? How do we combat the next Omicron? Certainly, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it is going to happen. And I actually think this is particularly important for business leaders, right? So for example, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference was last week, right? Virtual. Davos is supposed to be this week, canceled. I had 4, large conferences in January, all canceled or set virtual, right? We need to be able to actually gather together to get work done. And so this idea of a biosecurity layer that basically allows us to get together safely, I think is going to be important both economically and socially. And we've been doing a lot in that area, particularly in the area of K-12 schools, which is one of the groups we really want to have in person. So about 220,000 students and teachers a week now are being tested by our program to keep those schools open, including during the Omicron wave that we're having now.
So what does a biosecurity infrastructure layer actually look like? Is that everyone's testing status, without having to ask or, do a wonky test before you show up?
So yeah, I'll give you an analogy. So number one, we're figuring it out is the short answer. If you went all the way back to like the era of like cholera, for example, when that was a pandemic disease, you had quarantines, you had people held at borders to see if they, had the disease before being let in, cities closing and things like that. The right answer was to develop modern sanitation to make our water clean. Well, we're living in a world where effectively our air is not clean. We're not filtering out respiratory illnesses. We're spreading them, sort of readily when we gather together. And we need to basically build general purpose tools like that. And that's going to be a mix of knowing where the virus is. So yeah, active, low cost testing. You saw today, the USPS will now send you 4 free at-home tests. If you just click a link on your browser, but also things like passive testing, filter the air in a room, ventilation, collect it and sequence it to look for new variants. We have a project with the CDC at major airports, including SFO, to sequence positive tests at the border to look for new variants before they grow in the country. Those are the types of things that need to get built if we're going to have sort of modern sanitation for respiratory illnesses.
We're seeing the wave in New York City slowing down, cases and hospitalizations dropping, but Dr. Fauci said today we cannot claim victory just yet, and certainly there's still so many people who have yet to be vaccinated. If it's not going to be vaccines that stop the virus or, everybody getting that shot, how can technology really help? How do you see technology really helping?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple pillars. So vaccines will be one, but they're not a silver bullet that takes away everything, as we've seen. Rapid therapeutic development, right? So our normal timelines to develop therapeutics are not really what works on the timescale of a pandemic. So we need to be able to move faster on things like novel antibody therapies and things like that. And then the third big leg of the stool, in my opinion, is think of it like a weather map, right? Like we know when a storm is showing up in New York City and we prepare for it, right? Well, you should know well ahead when a wave is coming and make certain interventions as a result. And you would do that if you had any idea of sort of where respiratory illnesses are spreading. That is a data and information problem, and it requires things like, for example, looking in wastewater, right? So you can actually detect the levels often before you start to see it showing up in hospitals, in wastewater systems, in cities and towns, even in buildings. That sort of infrastructure all needs to get built. That's the missing piece. We've been flying blind by and large and always trying to catch up to the last wave effectively rather than getting ahead of the next one. That's what's getting built now with things like the rapid test program, sequencing at the borders, wastewater, and also what's happening in K-12 schools.
Right. Well, and then the next question is deployment. Ginkgo Bioworks CEO Jason Kelly, thank you for helping us think ahead. Appreciate you, as always, stopping by. Coming up, Flight delays averted. AT&T and Verizon have agreed to new 5G limits in an effort to avoid flight delays around a dozen airports. We'll have more on that next. This is Bloomberg. AT&T and Verizon have agreed to temporarily delay switching on hundreds of 5G cell towers near U.S. airports. This following last-minute talks with government officials. This an effort to avoid flight disruptions that could have started this week. President Biden issued a statement highlighting that expanding 5G is a priority and that his team has been engaging nonstop with stakeholders to chart a path forward for 5G deployment and aviation to safely coexist until they close the remaining gap and reach a permanent, workable solution. Joining me now to talk more about this, Bloomberg's Alan Levin. Alan, give us the latest. How did this détente, if you will, come together?
Well, there's nothing like a hard deadline to get people talking, I guess. The new service is set to switch on tomorrow, and as they were crunching numbers over the weekend, airlines became concerned that there would be some considerable amount of flight disruptions, including delays, possibly cancellations, et cetera. And so they called the wireless companies in, or I should say the Federal Aviation Administration called these companies in, and they agreed to postpone implementing 5G at least around airports.
Now, you've told us these airwaves are more powerful. There are sort of unknown risks. Ultimately, how is that overcome? Is there a magic wand? Quickly, we've got about 30 seconds.
It's a real tough question. Obviously, swapping in new equipment is the long-term solution, but I think it's going to take a lot of engineers, a lot of work to figure this out as we move along.
All right, Bloomberg's Alan Levin. Question for passengers everywhere. Thank you for filling in some blanks there. Coming up, we're going to dive deeper into that massive Microsoft-Activision deal and what it means for the gaming community and its culture. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. I want to get back to our top story. Microsoft buying Activision for $68.7 billion. It's got a lot of stocks on the move. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow back with the latest. Ed, take it away.
We've spent most of the day, most of the show talking about what it means for Microsoft. What does it mean for Activision Blizzard? What does it mean about future products? But the market is already talking much bigger picture than that. You look at some of the stock movers on Tuesday. Yes, Activision Blizzard, the main mover on the deal, of course, but Electronic Arts almost 3%, pairing some of its gains towards the end of this session. Take-Two as well, up 1%, but had been much higher earlier in the session. And then you got Roblox down 2.3%, which I'll come into in just a second. But Wall Street is already talking about what happens next. Will we see Apple or Amazon come in for one of these names, like Electronic Arts, like Take-Two, who themselves are involved in M&A with Zynga, right, albeit at a much smaller scale? There's discussion about this industry being ripe for consolidation and the next phase of the evolution in video gaming. But there's another point of conversation which we already touched on, the metaverse, right? That's why I bring up Roblox, because when we've been talking about the metaverse over the last 12 months, we have talked about Roblox as kind of an early leader in that. But Piper Sandler out with a note saying Microsoft's acquiring of Activision is an arms race, a metaverse arms race. Can you imagine such a thing? A virtual arms race. Anyway, stick with me. Unity Software is a company down 5% almost on Tuesday, but it makes software for 3D platforms, right? To power the future metaverse. They're saying this stock is a buy, yet it's down on this news. Competition in the metaverse. Again, Meta, parent company of Facebook, also down. So Wall Street's really thinking about what comes next and where will we see more action in this space.
All right, big question indeed. Ed, thank you. I want to continue the conversation about what this deal could mean for the future of gaming, and I'm joined now by Brianna Wu. She is the executive director of the Rebellion PAC and a longtime advocate for women in gaming. Now, Brianna, you fought a long time for inclusion in this industry since before Gamergate, when you yourself became a target, and you actually tweeted that you don't think this deal is good for the gaming community and workers. Why not?
Well, first of all, I just want to apologize to your listeners for my voice. I'm a little bit hoarse today. I think it has the potential to be good. I think that we need to see what happens next. You're coming from Microsoft, which is a company with a very mixed treatment of women in the Xbox division. And basically, they're acquiring Activision Blizzard, which has had a very serious set of scandals with the way they've treated women, to the point that the state of California is pursuing some rather shocking cases against them. So, it looks like their CEO, Bobby Kotick, is going to exit the company. I think most people that have looked at this story think this is a good direction for it. But I think it's really, the question is, Microsoft going to be a good steward? Are they going to be able to right the ship around? Video game companies are nothing without the people that make them. The simple fact is we're seeing a lot of turnover in the video game industry right now with working from home in the pandemic. People have options in where they go to work. So I think it's really imperative that Microsoft right the ship so they can have the best people in the world making games for them.
Now, you've had a lot of calls for Kotick to resign leading up to this, including from employees themselves, and it's not clear that he's necessarily going to leave the company after the deal is done. If he did leave the company, do you think that would solve the cultural issues, or is this something that runs much deeper?
I think if you look at some of the Wall Street Journal reporting of this issue, it's very clear that culture comes from the top at these companies. According to stories that have come out, Kotick personally interceded with many of these sexual harassment investigations. So obviously the devil's in the details, but it's really hard to imagine it not getting better. If you look at the Xbox division, the Xbox division today is not what it was in 2014 and 2015. There are a lot more women in senior leadership. The stories I personally hear coming out of the Xbox division at Microsoft are much better these days. Personally, I think it's an encouraging sign. But as you said, this also kind of puts these efforts to push Bobby Kotick out the door on hold as we kind of wait for this merger to go through.
Satya Nadella used the word inclusion and wanting the committing to the gaming industry becoming more inclusive. Do you believe that's something that Microsoft under his leadership can pull off, given how deep-seated these issues are? But certainly Microsoft does have a track record of making big acquisitions work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The women I personally know that work at Microsoft, generally speaking, have good things to say. I think when it comes to these kind of cultural issues, you need to pay attention to what people's track record is. What have they done? Have they been effective in solving these issues? I think Microsoft hasn't been perfect, but they've been pretty good overall. So I personally believe in this move. Additionally, there's also the issue of who gets the opportunity to be on the platform. If you look at Game Pass, this is the kind of center product for Xbox. They have a real history of taking indie games, which disproportionately are made by women and people of color and LGBT people, and really putting them center stage. You have a game like Unpacked that came out last year, very small development team, won many awards. It's just a stellar game. That's the kind of opportunity that gets the chance to be in front of more eyeballs with something like Game Pass. So I think that really could work very well.
Speaking of eyeballs, I have to ask you about your efforts to get Gamergate to the small screen. Talk to us about the series and what we'll learn about how much the gaming industry has and hasn't changed since then.
Yes, it was announced a few weeks ago. We are working with Hollywood to turn Gamergate into a television series. If you really kind of draw the line between the January 6th insurrection, there is a straight line to Gamergate and this culture of how we fight online, misinformation, and a lot of other factors about social media companies and their responsibility in kind of amplifying these dark forces that have come to kind of poison American culture. So that is the television show that we're working to put together. It's a mix of fiction and biographical information about what happened. We're really excited about that. The truth is, the video game industry is a truly magical place to work. We have our struggles, but I've personally never seen it represented in a way that I felt was really accurate in film or television. So we're very excited to put that forward.
All right. Looking forward to seeing that and appreciate you sharing the progress. Brianna Wu with Rebellion PAC, a longtime advocate in the gaming industry for unrepresented people in that industry. Appreciate you taking the time. Coming up, the NBA's Golden State Warriors distancing itself from a part owner after he made the claim that nobody cares about Uyghurs living in China under prosecution. His comments going viral, shooting the NBA into another China-related controversy. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
Nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? You bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard.
Wait,
I'm
you're
telling
saying
you
you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth. Okay, of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line.
That comment made by Chamath Palihapitiya on the All In podcast over the weekend going viral. The billionaire venture capitalist is not only widely followed, but also a part owner of the Golden State Warriors NBA team. Following the backlash, Palihapitiya, who was born in Sri Lanka, says he realizes he's, quote, lacking empathy and that as a refugee himself, human rights issues are very much part of his lived experience, adding that human rights matter, whether in China or the United States. The Warriors also put out a statement distancing themselves from Palihapitiya, saying he's a limited investor and that his views don't reflect the organization. Uyghurs, the predominantly Muslim minority in China's western Xinjiang region, have faced persecution with as many as 1 million Uyghurs forced into internment camps and prisons. The U.S. government has declared it genocide. I'm joined now by Jamil Jaffer. He is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. And Jamil, there are business reasons and cybersecurity reasons that we need to care about this on top of the human rights issues, which of course are most important. What do you make of Chamath's comments here?
Well, it's obviously, unfortunately, a troubling reality of American business elites today, right? We've seen Chamath say what he said. We've seen the NBA push back on their own management, their own players, when they've made comments about China's atrocious human rights, political, economic, social record. We've seen the Intel CEO, right, walk back his comments. And it's very troubling because what we've seen is China has put pressure on business leaders. And I worry that Chamath's right, that a lot of people in the business community, the elite community, like to talk about it, but don't actually care, because at the end of the day, their economic interests are not aligned. And that's a huge problem, because at the end of the day, our nation's economic and technological and political and social interests are aligned with speaking out against these type of behaviors by the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, and yeah, as you mentioned, the NBA's, the Warriors statement didn't go far enough, according to many folks. You mentioned Pat Gelsinger and Intel, the back and forth they had over this Uyghur issue. The CEO was forced to apologize about the comments, but still didn't take a stand on China specifically. Why can companies take a stand, but not on China?
I think part of it, Emily, is that China and the Chinese Communist Party is putting pressure on these companies, saying, look, if you want to invest here, if you want Chinese workers, if you want your products sold here or produced here, you're going to have to toe the party line. And the fact of the matter is that while in the short term, it may very well be in the economic interests of American companies or American CEOs or the NBA to walk back these comments, the truth of the matter is that the United States has been so productive and so successful as a nation, and technology, the Silicon Valley being at the heart of that success, is because we have the political and the economic freedoms we do. And the fact is that we are in a global competition with China, and the less we push back and the more we allow their view of the world to dominate, the less likely we are to see the kind of innovation and success that has made America so amazing in the 200 plus years that we've been around.
What do you make of this happening against the backdrops of the Olympics about to start in Beijing, the U.S. doing this diplomatic boycott, which, many have said just doesn't go far enough?
We're allowing our athletes to compete in these games, which is obviously good for the athletes, but it puts horrifically tough pressure on them because now they're the only ones who can really stand up for American values. Our companies are going to be there. They're going to be sponsors of the Olympic Games. They're not speaking out. The U.S. government is engaged in a diplomatic boycott, but we haven't pulled our athletes. Now our athletes have to make a tough choice. Will they accept medals from the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, or will they take a stand like Enes Kanter Freedom has, like Peng Shuai did in China against the abuse of the Chinese Communist Party? And if they do, what kind of penalty are they going to pay for that? And that's unfortunate. We put our athletes in this position, right, when our government hasn't had the guts to engage in a full boycott, and our companies are still being sponsors of these games. It's very troubling, Emily.
Bloomberg is also reporting concerns over spying issues with athletes connecting to the internet in China during the game. I mean, if you were an athlete, would you use your phone in China? How would you circumvent this?
Yeah, look, I think the advice that's being given is the right one. Don't get on the Wi-Fi at the Olympic Village. Bring a burner phone. It obviously makes things difficult, but I think that's probably the right advice because the chances are, if you bring up a device, you put it on the Wi-Fi, chances are you're going to go home with some amount of Chinese malware on your system, and that's going to allow them to take data back. The Chinese have been very aggressive in collecting information, not just on the U.S. government, but against American private companies. The IP theft is rampant, and there is a desire on behalf of the Chinese government to get access to devices and identify what's on them and use it for intel collection and potential human intelligence exploitation. So it is a challenge, and the question becomes now, as an athlete, how do I function effectively? I want to be on social media, but I've got this burner phone. How do I do that effectively? And that's the real challenge.
At this point, we've been seeing the threat level rise from state actors around the world, from Russia to China. Talk to us about what you're sort of seeing in cyberspace leading up to these games, especially from nation states. What's the biggest concern?
Yeah. Well, look, people have often asked, who's the bigger threat, China or Russia when it comes to the cyber domain? I think long run, China's the bigger threat in the cyber domain because of their capabilities, the skills they're developing, and frankly, the amount of resources and manpower they get put into the problem. Today, however, I think Russia's the most dangerous party because they have demonstrated a willingness to go after critical infrastructure, both directly and through proxies. They're about to get engaged in what looks like a potential invasion of Ukraine. We're likely to push back economically. They may make a strategic or tactical miscalculation and engage in cyberspace in a way that is hugely problematic and requires us to respond. So I worry in the short term about Russian activity. Long run, China is clearly the bigger and more concerning threat.
All right, Jamil Jaffer, Executive Director of the National Security Institute. Always appreciate your thoughts here on the show. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, VC investing, still lagging when it comes to women-founded startups. We're going to be joined by Lux Capital's Dina Shakir to talk about what needs to be done to level the playing field once and for all, and what she thinks the top VC trends are for 2022. That's next. This is Bloomberg. The non-fungible token startup Animoca brand attracted some big-name investors in a funding round that more than doubled its valuation of $5 billion. Soros Fund Management and the Winklevoss Twins venture capital firm were among those putting money in. Animoca and its subsidiaries offer NFTs and games tied to blockchain platforms. Well, female founders secured just 2% of venture capital in the United States in 2021. That is the smallest share since 2016. It's the second year in a row that women's percentage of VC funding shrank. Let's get an update on that and talk about what we should expect for 2022 with Lux Capital's Dina Shakir. Dina, good to have you back with us. So, look, do you have any idea why that number is shrinking?
Great to be back, Emily. Thanks for having me. You know, we saw a record-breaking year in terms of dollars deployed to venture-backed companies in 2021. And that's the other recent news that came as we wrapped up the year. Over $630 billion globally, $320 billion or so in the US alone. And so while the raw number of dollars going into women-led companies is increasing, the percentage is lower than it has been, as you mentioned, since 2016. And interestingly, that number is actually different when you take into account male co-founders. And that number is also quite shocking if you consider the performance of women-led companies, both on the private side as well as the public side. There is data across the board showing higher revenue, better ROI for investors, shorter time to exit, and yet that is juxtaposed against a decline in terms of percentage of dollars being deployed.
So there's certainly the glass half full part of the answer, which is that, well, overall dollars are increasing, which means overall funding is increasing, but women are still getting a smaller piece of that overall pie. At this point, what needs to change after Me Too, after Silicon Valley's Me Too, after organizations like Allraise have come together and really sounded the alarm on this issue? What else can we do?
You know, I think we are in a much better place in a lot of ways. There are organizations like Allraise and Him for Her that are focused on increasing the pool of capital, increasing the number of check writers. There is evidence that Kaufman Fellows and others have documented that shows a direct correlation between diverse cap tables and diverse companies in terms of founders. And so I think the more of that that we see, the more that we'll see this number increasing. And there's also this sort of more macro picture here. If we look at the representation of women taking their companies public, the cover of Fortune magazine a few months ago that was talking about these newly minted billionaire founders, Whitney Wolfe Herd from Bumble. We see Anne Wojcicki taking her company public with 23andMe, Anjali Sood from Vimeo. It is a very different picture than what we're used to seeing on the New York Stock Exchange. And so I think that will have an impact. Representation matters across the board. My daughter just a few months ago asked me if one day boys can grow up to become VCs. And I think the more the next generation sees people like you and me, Emily, having these conversations, founding and funding these companies, the more we'll start to see the needle move over time. It's not a pipeline.
And your job, of course, is trend spotting, figuring out where to make that next big bet. What are the trends you see really taking hold in 2022?
Yeah, it's been a very eventful 18 days thus far already in 2022. Not only did we wrap up, the massive year for the industry, but in the last few weeks alone, we've seen, double-digit billions of dollars being announced to invest in more companies. At Lux, we continue to be excited about the potential of deep and groundbreaking scientific technology to move the needle. Health tech being an area that, although there may be some ups and downs on the public side, we continue to be quite excited about in terms of the long-term view. Women's health is an area that you and I have spoken about when we announced our co-lead of Maven Clinic Series D. There are still so many opportunities in this space. Not only are women represented, obviously in terms of the population numbers, but they also control 80% of the dollars in healthcare. And yet only 4% of dollars in terms of R&D are actually being deployed towards funding solutions in women's health. We need better solutions for early detection of cancer. We need more innovation in the Medicaid space, where nearly half of babies in the US are born. And we are also excited about opportunities to bolster the infrastructure of digital health. Who will become the next Stripe or AWS to power the digital health revolution?
So, quick question, how do we ensure women have a seat at the table with these next big waves? I'm worried it's not happening in crypto. How do we make sure it happens with digital health and the metaverse? 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Well, last week we announced an organization that I was a founding member of called My BFF, which Britt Morin and Jamie Schmidt started, specifically focused on making sure women do have a seat at the table. We saw lots of conversation in the Twitterverse around Web 2 versus Web 3, and yet women were markedly absent from the conversation. 80% of creators in this space are male. And so I'm excited to see the incredible women coming to the table here in the metaverse, in the digital health world, and beyond.
Lux Capital's Dina Shakir, great to have you back with us. Thank you. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you tune in tomorrow, day 2 of the Bloomberg Year Ahead Summit. We're going to be talking to CEOs changing the digital landscape. I'll be joined by the CEO of Crypto.com, Chris Marszalek. We'll ask him some of these questions. That is next. This is Bloomberg.